With Amex Platinum, you get priority notified with global dining access by Resi, so you can get first dibs if a spot opens up at restaurants. And compliments to the chef turns into compliments to your Platinum card. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex.
I'm Debbie Travis.
And I'm Tommy Smythe.
And this is Trust Me, I'm a Decorator.
Hello, Debbie Travis.
Hello, Tommy Smythe. Well, we're wrapping up the year.
We are. This is our second full year of doing Trust Me, I'm a Decorator, the podcast, which is astonishing to me how many interesting people we've talked to, including each other.
Oh my goodness, it's a funny time of year, isn't it? You know, I mean, everybody's panicked and busy because the holiday's coming, but also at the same time, you start, you know, what are you going to change next year? Are you going to be a better person, a more positive person, a thinner person? And you start kind of recapping what happens. So what was 2024 like for you, Tommy? Apart from the time you spent with me.
It was a year of ups and downs for sure. I mean, the design industry is changing and evolving rapidly, and we're trying to keep up with it. In my work life, it's been extremely exciting, but also challenging. We've had enormous success, but it's been certainly at a cost because we're trying to sort of grow a small business. We're 5 years in now. We did a rebrand and a relaunch of our website, which was a Herculean effort that took a full year to come to fruition. So there were a lot of interesting side projects, fascinating things. We completed projects in Texas and Toronto and Seattle and had a lot of really great, amazing opportunities for design. And then, you know, personally, it's been an ups and down year too. I mean, one of my nieces went to university, the first one of that generation in our family to go to university. She's gone to McGill. And, you know, that's left one of my three sisters with a little bit of an empty nest. And so that's been a huge adjustment. So I've had to step up and, you know, be a big brother for a little bit and occupy some time for her. So there's been a lot of change this year. And you're right, it is such a busy time, but it's also such a reflective time. I think the world, if you look at what's happening in global conflicts and with regard to human rights, and, you know, human rights issues have rarely been as amplified as they are in North America right now, which is unusual. You know, usually you're campaigning for the rights of people in other countries, but now it's become such a huge conversation here. So lots of positive and lots of, you know, challenge as well.
The one good thing is we're all on the same boat, aren't we? I mean, I think we're all burnt out and fed up of politics, fed up of, you know, being dictated to and controlled. That's what I find. You know, you see a lot of the media now I just feel really controlled. I don't know what to believe anymore with elections and things. And not just North America, but also Europe, you know, is going either one very left or very right. And I know a lot of people who feel this year they're living in a bubble, like they've created their bubble. My home is my bubble. I think that's why your business is so fantastic because, you know, design is, you know, you're creating, it's all we've got really, isn't it? Our four walls around us where we feel safe.
Our safe place, yeah.
Our safe place. So I think that's kind of cool. For me, I mean, I think it was a joyous year, I have to say. So the highlights, I still find this hard to say out loud, but I'm a granny. So my eldest had a baby and absolutely beautiful and adorable. And it's been very hard not sharing it with people because I have had strict instructions that nothing goes on social media. And you know what? I think they're absolutely right.
This is the way now.
Yeah. And she's so beautiful and so gorgeous and so happy. And, you know, so you're just dying to show those photos. I still find, and I know it's all ego, virtually I cringe when I say the word, you know, grandma or granny. It's like, and it's so, you know, it's so awful. But I, you know, I was thinking I did the same thing when I got married. When I got married, I didn't want to say I was married. You know, I used to, well, kind of. So what does that mean? Well, yeah, I guess I'm married, you know, because it felt old, you know, when you're in your kind of late 20s. And I was like, I want to be a single girl. So I found that a bit difficult. It's pathetic, really. And then, you know, one of the things that happened to me this year is I went on tour with the book, the new book that's out recently.
Yep.
And that was so fantastic to see so many people, so many coming out and saying, you know, what their time spent here in Tuscany with us meant to their lives.
Yeah. So big.
I never really have any understanding completely of what we really do here, because it's a whirl when they're here. When they've gone, you're moving, getting you ready for the next lot. And when people walk up to you in their hometown and fall apart and sob on your shoulder and say, you know, you changed my life,
Yeah.
or, you know, I found joy again. You know, I'm trying not to kind of burst into tears in front of them, but it really knocks you for something. And the other thing that happened that I found quite extraordinary was a lot of people we'd done shows with in the past, you know, especially Facelift, where we surprised people. I know a woman came up to me and said, you did my home, you know, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and we'd surprised her, and her husband had died, and she had been unable to go into their basement because it was full of his stuff.
Wow.
And he'd been dead, I think, for a couple of years, but the children got together, teenagers, which we weren't supposed to do this legally, but we worked with the kids to clean it out and sort it out. And this woman came up, and I completely, it was a great show, but, you know, again, you move on, and said, this was the beginning of the beginning for me. And I said, wow, you look amazing. And she said, yeah, you know, sometimes it takes, you know, a kick up the butt,
A push. Yeah.
done by an outsider, you know. So that was lovely. And I crossed the country coming out and sitting on a stage, and there's an auditorium full of people. I have to say,
I know, darling, you come alive on stage.
it's like being plugged in. Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we did this year, we did 2 live podcasts, which for the same reason was fantastic. And it does make you, it brings out the best and the worst in you, and you're not filtered as there's no editing. So I think that's wonderful. And it's what it must be like if you're an actor on stage. And it's funny because all actors always say they love theatre best.
Yes, of course, because the energy is so different. And you remember when we used to do a lot of live television on the talk shows, and
Yeah.
live television and live radio, it's a similar vibe. You just feel an incredibly different energy. There's an urgency and an excitement to it. It's electric. Yeah,
Fear.
it's a lot of fun. It's fear, but it's also like you get so much interaction and energy from the audience, and they're
Yeah.
there to experience something together. It's a shared experience. And I think there's
Yeah.
something very human about that. And that's why theater is so ancient and why it's still going, is because, you know, with all the screens that we have and all the telephones and the distance and the Zoom calls and all those things, being in a room with people and being entertained and sharing that experience together as a one-off is so rare, and it's so special, and it always will be.
And that's, again, another thing, that I really hope for next year. I think it's starting to get out there now for the younger generation that it's imperative that they get off this thing. And, you know, Australia just made no cell phones under 16 now, as of, I think,
Was
now.
it Australia or New Zealand? I guess it was Australia.
No, it's Australia.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, there's a backlash, but that's mostly by 15-year-olds. But I think it's wonderful. And I do hope, I mean, it's a great experiment that people will follow, because I've got a lot of friends whose kids are suffering very, very badly now from COVID. It's really starting to hit those COVID years of being alone, because for that generation, they should not have been alone. You know, for my generation, it was kind of nice to hunker down and just be with people you love. So I think that's a big hope for next year. So for me, it was a very joyful year. And now I'm a little bit, what am I going to do next? Yeah. Well, I've got a full year of retreats, but, you know.
You certainly have more, I think, writing in you. You're an excellent writer.
Yeah.
And there are certainly more books in you. And with the massive success of this recent book, I'm sure your publisher will be, you know, knocking on the door very, very shortly, because once this book goes through its sell cycle, they're going to want more. And so, I do think you have lots of stories still to tell. And I think, you know, that's always going to be something that you do. But watching you experience the success of the most recent book, and having read the book and enjoyed it so much, I mean, it's just a creative outlet, but it's similar to the retreats in the sense that, you know, you're able to share something that is personal and that is based on joy and laughter. But with a book, you get to reach a wider audience. You can only have so many human bodies at the villa every year. With a book, you can reach so many more people.
Yeah.
And it's been an interesting observational exercise for me to see how that translated for your audience and for your reading audience. So that was a big highlight for me too. I loved watching my friends be successful. I had several friends who launched books this year. Jeannie Becker, who was on our podcast this year, beautiful book that I thoroughly enjoyed from cover to cover. So many people that we speak to on this podcast.
Yeah, Frances Mays.
I loved Frances's book. I was DMing her on Instagram about the blue door in the house in the book because I had a photograph of what I think is that exact blue door.
Oh, in England.
Mm-hmm. It's on Great Ormond Street in the same neighborhood that she writes about in the book. And the little bookstore that she writes about in the book is quite close to one that I go to as well. There's a little cluster of antiquarian bookstores. So I was really immersed in her writing because I know that part of London really well. And I sent her the photograph of the door and she sent me a message right back saying, that's the color. And she had described it so perfectly that I went back in my photos and found it. So it's been a wonderful way to reconnect with old friends and new friends through their writing and through their books.
I think that's the podcast as well. I think the great joy, just so people know, we do this out of the love of our hearts. And just because we like talking, but also having guests on, we're not interviewers, right?
Not by training, certainly.
Not by training.
We're interrogators by nature.
Yeah. But it is a wonderful chat. And I think I've learned, I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot from the people we've had on this year.
So
and the spectrum has been, so like if we take, the last one we just did was Sophie Trudeau.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't what we expected at all, because I thought she was going to talk about all the presidents that she'd met and presidents' wives and the gossip and the state dinners and things. But she talked about her new love, her fascination with mental health and her journey. And who knew? Because she couldn't talk about that previously. And I found it very, very emotional to listening to her, talk about her mental health issues. And I really think it's helped a lot of people. And she's written a book about it. And I think anybody who's going through all that should have a peek at it. It's about the interviews she did with the real top experts, people like Gabor Mate and stuff, who are just incredible. I like that because it threw me into something that I didn't really expect. And then we did, our great friend Lynn Crawford, a completely different response in the way that here's somebody who had this mega career. She owned restaurants in the airports, restaurant downtown, a very popular restaurant, so many books, television shows, height of her career, loved by so many people. And she has two small children who are they've been to stay with me. You've been to stay with them.
Yeah.
And, she reminded me of Elton John. I was reading an article about Elton John the other day.
She would love that comparison.
Yes. Well, because he, with David Furnish, he has two youngest children. Mm-hmm. And, he's just announced that he's gone blind. He's lost his eyesight. And he said something so poignant to an interviewer. He said, all I wish for is to be at my children's wedding. And I don't think I'm going to see that. But he wants to be home now. He cleaned up his act dramatically to have family life, which was wow, that's the Elton John. And I think Lynn Crawford, I'm not saying she was badly behaved or anything, but, she said she's taken a step back and to choose what she wants to do, to live on this kind of amazing farm with, two little girls on the back of the tractor, dogs running behind her and stuff. And that was, again, such a lovely surprise, because I think you hear it differently when they're chatting through the podcast than when we're sitting having a drink together. So I thought that was lovely. What did you get out of some of our favorite guests, or all our guests, really?
I have a few favorites, but speaking of Lynn, let's go to a little clip of our podcast with Lynn.
It was during pandemic, the crazy pandemic times, and Laura and I, with Addie and Gemma, our two daughters, we just didn't want to be in the city anymore. And we made the move, which was a big life change. And we bought 100 acres just outside of Peterborough, Ontario, where we were closer to family. And that's where Laura's family is all situated, in sort of that neighborhood and that community. And what we wanted to do was, for the next chapter, was really change it up from everything that we're used to and accustomed to, crazy restaurant life and television and anyway, leave that all behind and get back to what's the most important: family, giving our girls the experience of where does your food come from, and growing and learning. And we're all really students learning together, which has been great. And to have this beautiful property where we are able to play. Like it's really such a pleasure. It's changed my life completely. I'm not ever looking back. I'm the happiest I think I've ever been. We have a huge garden, 2 new greenhouses. Gosh, I bought a tractor. I mean, I am like, I'm living the life. And pitching in was wonderful in that you got to work with the farmers and the growers and the ranchers firsthand and know where your food comes from. But now we're doing that for ourselves on a day-to-day. And it's such a huge responsibility, but such a huge pleasure. And again, it's like mental health. Like I'm just like happy, like looking out, at the wheat fields and the corn and then our beautiful garden. So I can't wait. I'm glad you got to see it, Tommy. Debbie, certainly next time you're here.
I'm going to be there end of October. I know it's probably not the best time to come, but I'd love to. Your vegetable garden's really big. Are you selling the veggies, or is it just for you guys? Are you just eating a lot?
My goodness. It's about, for chefs, we're used to cooking in volume, right? So maybe we're a little bit over the top, but we have a lot of family and friends. And that's what it is. And we'll say to people, please come. I'm up at the cottage right now. There's raspberries in the raspberry patch. Like I've never seen so many raspberries. It was like a bumper crop, and the cherries. We have cherry trees in our backyard. So we say to our friends, come on over, bring your containers, pick away and enjoy it. So, and then,
before the birds come, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's more cherries. Even the birds are like, okay, time out. But no, it's been really great, really great. But preserving the foods, picking, and the kids they'll run down to the garden and just like pick the beans and picking green onions, and like I'm like, whoa.
Wow.
It's amazing to watch.
It's a fantasy. I mean, really, for a lot of people who dream of country life and literally living off the land, it's such a old-fashioned notion to a lot of people who live in cities. And it's not an option that's available to everybody who lives in cities. And that's why it's so inspiring, because we can all live vicariously through this adventure that you and Laura and the kids are on. And I know that it has also inspired your next book, which I've been telling everybody you and Laura wrote for me. Because I've been plant-based for such a long time. But did that all come out of this experience of having this garden in the land?
It certainly did, Tommy. And it's amazing how your palate changes, and making those conscious decisions to be, healthier and cook with what comes from your garden.
I know lots of top chefs have made similar moves in terms of leaving the big city, closing the big, wildly successful restaurant. Everybody's, why did you do that? You're on top of the world. And then they move to the country. And then eventually, after a little while, they do maybe like a pop-up restaurant where you could come and have something to eat. Have you and Laura ever considered doing something similar to that out in the region, like in the Peterborough region? Just a little, like, oh, it's been a bumper year. Maybe we'll make some things and invite some people. And I'm just asking a question that everybody who's listening is wondering.
Tommy, I do miss cooking, right? In the environment of having a freestanding restaurant and being there. It's all encompassing.
Yeah.
And now it's a different chapter for me. And I don't know, like we both, Laura and I, have entertained the thought about, pop up or have people over to the house and let us cook for you. But you know what? I'm quite fine now being behind the scenes. I'm okay with that. And 24 years with the Four Seasons, Ruby Watchko was 10 years. Like, start doing the math. I mean, like, and I know that I'm only 32, and how have I packed all of those years in? But,
yes.
No, I think I'm good.
Lynn, isn't there a breakfast pancake or something at the Four Seasons under your name?
Yeah.
Still called the Lynn Crawford.
The lemon ricotta hotcakes,
Yeah.
right? Gosh, how many of those have I flipped in my lifetime? I'm telling you. But, all great, great memories. And I think that for me, what I get most pleasure of, really, truly, if somebody asks me, there's, say, a charity event or something, and I can participate that way, absolutely. But having friends, family come over.
It takes an enormous amount of strength to be able to walk away from one life and start another. And speaking of strength, Jeannie Becker, amazing guest. I love her.
What was so astounding about Jeannie's story, I think, is what resonated with so many people was strength. Through social media, she posted her journey having cancer. And you saw her go from healthy to rock bottom, losing her hair, then up again, and then just getting better. And that is the wonder, I think, of social media, where you're seeing somebody that somebody at home can relate to and say, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. And I think that she was marvelous. And the strength is what came out of me for that.
Yeah, the remarkable thing about Jeannie is that she never stopped living her big, beautiful life throughout her cancer treatments. She was still in the world. She was still gathering the strength to be able to get out there and see her friends and support her friends. So let's listen to a little clip from Jeannie.
Well, when I was approached by Simon & Schuster to do a memoir, and it was strange in a way because I've got two other memoirs, one that came out in 2000, one that came out in 2011. So, I thought, well, they must just be wanting me now to tell the story of my cancer journey because I'd been public about it. And they said, no, we just think that you've got some great life lessons. And, we want you to do just another kind of, recollection that maybe seen through a different lens. I chose the lens of wardrobe because that's how so many people know me. And that's how so many people, remember me. And it ended up being a wonderful exercise in editing, because if I didn't have a great, every chapter, these are all stories and they're not in any chronological order either. It's heart on my sleeve, stories from a life well worn. So every chapter starts with a garment or an accessory or a piece of jewelry. And I use those pieces as springboards into the storytelling. So even though I've got a lot of great stories in me, I couldn't tell all of them because not all had a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or an accessory that I could really tie to it.
But I like that because that relates to the reader, because everybody's got something that you never throw out in your wardrobe.
Exactly.
A pair of shoes, or like in your case, your red boots. And that's something that has a real memory wrapped around it. And you keep it, even though it's 100 sizes too small, or you'll never wear it again. I mean, you're lucky you pass it on to your girls, but it's such a great memory. And I think that really relates to everybody.
Yeah. And I really am hoping that the book will really make people see their wardrobes anew, perhaps for some people, or at least really appreciate the sentimentality behind these incredible pieces that one writer had called them wordless witnesses to our lives. These garments, these pieces of clothing. I mean, they're with us. They're on us. They empower us often. Sometimes they, I suppose, like disempower us if we're not really feeling good about what we're wearing. But for the most part, these pieces that we treasure and that we cherish and that we remember so vividly, whether we actually physically still have them or not, because sadly, I don't have each and every garment that I'm writing about. I do have a lot of them. But some of them, my mom threw out my Sweet 16 dress. That was just such a sad day. But certain things we at least have pictures of ourselves in, or at least crystal clear images in our memory, in our hearts that we hold on to.
What about the maternity dress you had?
Oh, now that's a great story, of course.
Was that Christian Dior?
No, the maternity dress, although they probably shudder to think that I'm calling it that. This was a gorgeous dress that was gifted to me by Karl Lagerfeld in the first, long sit-down interview I had with him. The year was 1989. In the summer of 89, I gave birth in the fall of 89. So it was a sweltering hot day in Paris, and we went to the couture atelier of Chanel on the eve of the big couture show. And I felt like a beached whale. I mean, I probably shouldn't have even been traveling at that point, but I was determined to work up until the very last minute. So there I was sitting there in this drab olive green maternity outfit, feeling like a bit of a beached whale, and waiting for hours for Carl to arrive because he was always notoriously late, but whatever, it was Carl. He was worth the wait. And Gilles Dufour, who was his assistant at the time, said, "Oh, maybe you'd like to borrow something from Chanel for the interview." I went, "Oh, what an opportunity. Like, what a chance. But how could I possibly take advantage of that?" Because I had really gained a lot of weight during my pregnancy. I just thought, whatever, 3 milkshakes a day, let's go for it. And we looked through the wraps, and I'm just saying, "Oh, quel dommage. I'm not going to be able to find anything to fit." And all of a sudden, he pulled out a dress that it had this big white satin kind of chevron down the front. It was a little black crepe number with cap sleeves and those gorgeous pearl and gold Chanel trademark buttons, and a black organza camellia at the neck. And he's, "This one might fit you because it's a boxy cut. Just try it." And I thought, "Oh, okay, fine. How embarrassing." And I went into the dressing room, pulled off a bit of my clothes, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, "Merde, this is just not going to happen." But I tried the dress on and voila, miraculously it fit. So I was delighted. Gilles was delighted. We waited another hour or two for Carl. Carl finally came in, sat across from him in the interview, and he complimented me, on the dress. "Oh, that's fabulous. It looks great on you." And I asked him if he had ever designed maternity clothes before. And he said once he did for Jerry Hall, but otherwise, no, not really. And at the end of the interview, we got along so famously. He said, "You know what? Ce sera un cadeau pour toi." That's going to be a present for you. And, the word cadeau in the fashion trenches, as you can imagine, is like, wow, the best word you could hear because it means a gift. So they gifted me with this dress, and now I have it to this day.
We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
We have one more act for you this evening. I don't even need to say his name. Mr. Bob Dylan.
From the director of Walk the Line and Ford vs. Ferrari.
If anyone is going to hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
Inspired by the true story.
I want to know which side he's on.
This Christmas.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my life.
Bobby, what do you want to be?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play it loud!
To change everything.
He's our Elvis.
With no direction.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro.
Make some noise, BD. Track some mud on the carpet.
A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
Entertaining this holiday season? Aperol Spritz is the perfect cocktail for hosting friends and family. Whether you're cozied up at home by the fire with snow falling outside, or you're heading out on a warm vacation, Aperol is the ideal companion to food and great company.
Adding a little pop of that orange color to your holiday decor isn't just gorgeous. Let's remember it represents the original secret recipe, an infusion of perfectly balanced herbs and roots, which is just as popular today as it was when it was created in 1919.
The holidays are a great excuse to get together and celebrate with friends. Cheers from Aperol, the perfect holiday aperitif, and the Women in Media Network.
Bring the spirit of Italy to your holiday, wherever you are. Join the joy and drink responsibly.
The great thing about podcasts is that you can listen to them anytime. They don't have to be in order. And I think a lot of people are going to be in the car off to holiday events and seeing their families and things over the next few weeks. And so, you can dive in and out of podcasts. And one of the ones that I found very interesting is how you take a medical situation and put something very natural and organic with it to help you mend. And we had a fascinating guest on called Anya the Garden Fairy.
Love Anya.
Wasn't she amazing? So she has severe ADHD, and she's Polish, but she lives just outside London, in the countryside. And she took just an ordinary garden, like a backyard, and she's turned it into something absolutely magnificent. She's got a best-selling book out now since we spoke to her. And she described to us how she took something organic like gardening and how it helped her. And we got so many fabulous messages about that afterwards, where people said, when I find myself very stressed or full of anxiety, I bake. And I love gardening. And to me, it's like, it really takes all the stress down, just, digging a few holes and putting a few plants in. And she was fascinating.
We go back to the kind of hunter-gatherers, that we feel good. I analyzed it. As you know, I've got ADHD, so I constantly search for a dose of dopamine, something, positive. There are obviously other sources of not so positive dopamine, but this is the best thing you can do, not only for neurodivergent people, but for everybody, because you create something for free. And, few seeds, if you put them in a pot on your windowsill, it just gives you that sense of achievement. I'm sure that our brain produces, dopamine or whatever from seeing them germinate,
Has this calmed you down then?
It slowed me down on many levels. Maybe didn't slow me down on, I constantly want to achieve things and, bigger things, more. So that's kind of my side of ADHD that will probably never stop. But it gives me a very healthy dose of dopamine. I'm very honest about the fact that in the past, I've been on many different paths and not all of them were the good ones. And that's probably why I'm so keen on spreading this message and sharing with people that it does slow you down to a certain degree, because you give yourself a break sometimes. When you plant something or when you take cuttings, this is the only place that I don't think about the past or the future. Because
that's interesting.
I only look at like when you look at the seedlings or when you look at the seed, my brain is always working. And this is the time, the garden is the only place where I really don't think much about the past, planning for the future. It's just living now. And it's so good. It's like a therapy for your mind,
So anybody who's going through something, they don't have to be ADHD, but if you're going through some kind of tough times or trauma or even a child, I think, who's a bit hyper, getting out into the garden. And I feel that I don't know if I'm ADHD. I wouldn't dare get tested, but I think I have all the symptoms. But, I'm constantly thinking, constantly doing stuff. I never sit down.
Yeah.
But when I go out, I can spend an hour on my knees in the sunshine, digging holes, and I just feel great. And I stopped thinking. You're absolutely right. Because if I was doing something like the washing up inside, I'd be like, oh God, I should have done that. And I should have done that. And that person didn't call. And, I'd be worrying about all kinds of things. But in a garden, I don't know, somehow you're so self-absorbed into the earth and the surroundings that it seems to stop those kind of crazy nerve endings from going, the noise in your head, and I'm sure for children, this must be an amazing therapy, growing something, especially food.
Yeah, I know that for a lot of people experiencing grief, if they've got even just a balcony garden or a container garden or a windowsill garden, tending to plants can really help with that process.
You mentioned grief. I was totally heartbroken at that point. I started creating this garden the day when my mum phoned me and told me that my sister had a baby. And she said there were complications. And initially I thought it was just complications, nothing serious, but it was the most serious thing. And it was devastating because I obviously had my own baby. And it was the only accessible thing for me to do to bring some positivity into my world. I think it was an instinct to go, my husband was at work every day and I was on maternity leave. And I, just like you, Debbie, I have just
I didn't make a plan. I'm not a professional gardener or a designer. I have just taken a spade. I fed my son. I put him in a little swing. It was a summer, beautiful, beautiful summer afternoon in August 2011, sorry. And I've taken a spade and I started digging. And at some point, I found myself on my knees with my hands in the soil. And that's what I later realized that was so positive and so helpful. And later, I also understood that there are some microbes in the soil. That's why we feel so good afterwards. This was my only accessible thing to do to bring some sort of sanity into the world of devastating news. So that phone call has changed my life forever. I become a very sad person, but the only thing that I had at that point that was keeping me sane and giving me purpose to get up in the morning was the garden.
It really resonated with a lot of our listeners, and certainly I know it did with you, and it certainly did with me, that she really is, like so many of our guests, not exactly what you see at first glance. That there's a depth there that is sort of like the obvious thing is propagating plants and teaching people how to economically and in a cost savings way have a beautiful garden or even just a windowsill garden. But then behind that is her struggles with ADHD and autism, and for her activism in that realm to connect that with her other vocation, which is gardening, I think is so brilliant because it can help so many people, as you said.
And if you think how the big year for somebody we both know and love is Martha Stewart, and she's had a massive year, being on the front page of Sports Illustrated in her mid-80s and launching, a 100 recipe cookbook or something. I mean, she's had an amazing year, but in a way, she brought all that back when everybody went like, oh, I can eat takeout food, I can have a gardener. She actually brought all that back throughout our careers. And now I think people are really starting to understand the benefit of the craft, the benefit of creating something for your stress levels, rather than just running out and ordering a meal online. Bake a potato, chop some chives, sit with your partner in the kitchen while you're cooking away. It's imperative for our health. It's imperative.
Yeah, we had a pretty robust conversation with Genevieve Gorder. So let's listen to a little clip from that too.
You don't just fall into a hole. You're like, oops, I'll be a designer. It's just the way we see and approach things and people that kind of determines if you're going to be a designer, in my mind. So yes, as a child, I was always up to no good creative business. So it was moving my bed, designing the headboard. I had very young parents. My mother was 20 when I was born. My dad was like 23. And we didn't have a lot of money. So, of course, we made everything. And that was my love language. So, colors in your bedroom. We all know this being on TV and who comes to see us when we present. It's always that 8-year-old who wants to show you their room plan and they've drawn it out for you. It's like that magical age.
Magical, yeah.
It's like when they just take ownership of their own space for the first time. And it's just the sweetest thing. And they're all adults now. And I love running into them. So many of them are designers, right? And they saw all of us doing what we do. And it was like, oh my God, we changed the life. That's amazing.
I know. Sometimes you think, oh, I feel so old. It's like, oh yeah, I watched you as I was growing up. But then you're like so proud.
Yes.
Because you've influenced them.
And we were growing up too. I mean, God, I started when I was 23. So if they were 12 and I was 23, I still don't feel bad about it. But it makes you feel like you gave away something bigger than just a home for a family. You touched millions by being joyful and creative and making it look fun. I honestly didn't want to get into interiors, and it was my minor in college because of the very conservative, small thinking and style that I saw everywhere, from designing women to the metropolitan home. I was like, this is so not my people. And when I came into it through television, and yes, I'd been practicing my whole life with all these houses we did growing up, and of course had an art education, but I was very hesitant to commit to interiors because I didn't think it was cool. And again, I'm coming from MTV and all the parties and the music, and worked in the world of music for a long time, actually. So TV convinced me that through this practice, I could kind of be the Midwestern person that I was, where it was like, everyone deserves everything. Let's all just get to work. And I could kind of punch through that waspy ceiling of what interiors were supposed to look like and how people were supposed to act.
And remove that barrier, that veil, like lift the veil from what it was. Because everybody could see it, but they couldn't really. It was out of focus for a lot of people.
Even Martha had it.
Exactly. Even Martha had it. She was very much the 1% and always presented that way. And I think what Trading Spaces did and what the Painted House did was it showed people a new way, a new way of having agency and autonomy and authenticity in your home. And also a way to fail, but fail with fun. And so not every sponge painting of kitchen cabinets, Debbie,
don't look at me,
is necessarily going to be successful long term. For me, I have to say that was a special episode because you and Jen are like the OG, lifestyle, hosts. So to hear these two women who are like titans of lifestyle TV talking about kitchens, I was mostly just an audience member, I feel like, on that podcast.
Two yucky women. But and again, she's had an incredible career, Trading Spaces and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
but
oh my God.
But it was interesting because she really talked about the benefits of the kitchen. And just like what we've been saying, how important it is. And even if you've just got a little galley kitchen, you can pull up a stool, have friends there. It's just the core of our being going back. And that's what we see in Tuscany. I met with so many journalists on this book tour, and they all said, why Tuscany? Of all the places in the world, why did you go there? And I said, it's because it's a time warp. People are living like our grandparents lived. They eat together, they chat, they never stop talking. They cook together, and it makes you feel 10 years younger, without a doubt. So I think she brought a lot of that in. And of course, amazing good design, because she's a fantastic designer.
Well, and the youngest seeming person I know in Tuscany is actually not all that young. And that's your friend, Frances.
Frances Mays, who wrote Under the Tuscan Sun and so many books since. We've had on the podcast twice. She was our first guest ever, and you and I went to her house. We went to the famous Bramasoli. So if you want to kind of listen to a great launch podcast, it was Frances Mays. And of course, we'd never done it before, and we had poor Patrick and Hans trying to do the technical stuff, and it was wild. But what is so great about Frances is
it's her youthful energy. Like, she is such a young person.
Yeah. And she's just traveled through India. I don't know if I've told this story before, but she told me that when she was in India, the hotel she stayed in wrote to her husband and said, we do this with everybody. Could you tell us who you are? And of course they didn't know. And he said, well, my wife is Frances Mays, who wrote all these books. And when she arrived at the hotel, she said in her room, she burst into tears because they had created a plate of cakes, and each one was the cover of each of her books.
Good heavens, that's
which
amazing.
I just think is so. She said it was incredible. What I think is so marvelous. So the second podcast we did with her this year was about her new novel.
Yes.
Which was about marriage, which was, I think, fascinating, and families, nothing to do with Italy. And it's set in America and England. And it's about the twists and turns of a marriage, a young marriage.
When I got to the end of it and I was reading the acknowledgements, I was like, holy shit, Debbie got mentioned in the acknowledgements of a Frances Mays book.
Yeah. She also wrote the back of my book. The publisher asked if Frances would write the piece on the back. My editor sent it to me with a funny emoji, and I didn't know what she meant. And when I read it, it was like, seriously, it's better written than the whole book, and it's just 3 sentences. She's just a brilliant writer. And so she's somebody that I look up to. And I think that's, again, something, and I've talked about this before, it's very good to have a guru, or to have somebody,
a mentor
who can inspire you. And that's the other thing that's, I think, wonderful about podcasts, because you can dip in and out of them. And if you learn one thing from these people and these guests on all podcasts. I think it's wonderful. It's
Well,
really enlightening.
Well, on that note, let's listen to and learn from a little clip from Frances.
I want to read something which I think will kick us off, which Frances wrote. Many are okay with a good marriage. Great is a whole other thing. A great marriage happens when two people buy enough to want more for the partner that they want for themselves. That is so true. So you want more for the person that you're with than you want for yourself. So that, in your eyes, is what makes a great marriage. Now, this is a novel. It's not a how-to book on how to have a happy marriage. But
or is it?
Or is it? But there's a lot of poignant pieces in there. So where is it set? Let's start with that.
Well, one place it's set is London. And I set it there because I hadn't been to London in a very long time. So I set that as one of my locations so that I could actually go to London for a few weeks and research where these people might have lived. One of the main characters went to Cambridge, so I went to Cambridge. And it was interesting to me to select a locale that I was not familiar with because most of my books, as you know, are centered in Italy. And I think as a writer, you have to stir the ice now and then so that it doesn't freeze over. And throwing myself into another locale was just part of wanting to make a change, wanting to write about some parts of the South, too, that I haven't ever written about. So place to me is always a big, big theme in my work because, I mean, partly as a travel writer, I go to places wanting to understand the people who are there and to understand how that place kind of shapes them into who they are.
You know, the title of the book, A Great Marriage, as soon as you read that first chapter, you're not really sure which marriage this book is going to be about or whether it's going to be about all of the marriages. And you have these amazing examples of, you know, like there's the matriarch, Charlotte, and she has had 2 marriages. And then there's the ingenue, Dara, who's just about to have a wedding. And then there's Lee in the middle with this long-term marriage. Like it's just really sets it up for, I'm dying to know what happens to these people and what has happened to them leading up to this dinner.
I think novels are very mysterious in the way that they arrive to you. This novel arrived partly because a young friend of mine was a runaway bride.
Ooh.
I don't know whether you remember that story, Debbie, but she was getting married in Cortona in like 2 weeks before the huge wedding and all these people coming over from the U.S. She bailed.
Wow.
And everything was in order. Every, napkin was ordered.
Oh, it was already. It was so, yeah. Oh my God, I remember that. The groom still did it, right?
No, she still came to Cortona with the wedding party, but without the groom.
Without the groom.
Wow.
It was partly inspired by that. It was also inspired by a family secret. I could not believe, because I'm someone who can make relatives talk and get to the bottom of things and put things together. I could not believe that there was this secret in my family for 25 years that I had not ferreted out from anyone. And I found out just by chance. And there's still other people in the family who don't know about this.
Well, they're about to.
No, because I totally disguised it. But it is about a very unexpected event in a couple's life. I just will say that. But in this case, it proved to be something incredibly drastic. Wow. But the choice my relative made seemed to me a very understandable choice. I could not believe the choice.
Relatable.
So in my book, the character makes the opposite choice. So it was like playing out what it would have been like if my relative had chosen the other path.
To turn left instead of to turn right. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, Debbie, that really was such an amazing conversation with Frances. And I feel like you so lucky to know her. But I also feel so lucky to know so many of our guests on the podcast. Some of them are old friends of mine and or yours, and some are new people. Like Sophie Gregoire was such an amazing guest. And as you said at the beginning of this chat today, so surprising in terms of her drive and her energy and her knowledge about mental health. We had Jan Arden, my old friend and your friend, who we had a serious conversation about animals and about her activism. Certainly there was a lot of laughs too, but it was a really beautiful, deep conversation that we had with her. So it's such a gift. I mean, being on the Women in Media Network, our guests they're all people that you and I admire. They're all people that you and I are so interested in. And it's been a pretty great year for that. These hours that we spend together talking to these incredible people, and of course, talking to each other, because you know how much I adore you, we have really had this amazing sprinkling of learning and laughing and energy throughout the year. It's been beautiful.
We shouldn't forget Jackie Brown with all her advice about health, which is my oldest friend, and she's an amazing nutritional therapist and comes from a very open way of talking about it rather than trying to push a product, but she makes sense of all the noise. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's entertained us. And I think our great pleasure is bringing in people we know and sharing them with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for following along with the Trust Me, I'm a Decorator podcast for another year. You can go back and listen to all of these episodes again at thetrustmepod.com. Tell us your favorites. Have an amazing holiday with friends and family, and Happy New Year. And we will see you in 2025.
It's got a nice ring to it, hasn't it? 2025. See you. Happy holidays, Tommy.
Yes, and Happy New Year.
I'm Debbie Travis, and I'm excited to announce that I have a new book. It's called Laugh More, Stories from an Unexpected Life. I mean, aren't we all in desperate need of a good laugh? Laugh More is about a wild and crazy year in Tuscany where I live at Villa Regnella, where I run an olive oil farm and hold retreats for women, and classic car rallies. I'll tell you, life is never boring here. So I began to write down the day-to-day commotions. And you know, when you tell a story, it triggers memories. So I delve into my past, growing up headstrong in the north of England in a large family with a young and beautiful widowed mother, and mad tales of me traveling the world as a model and starting the first decorating show in North America. And since memories are often ignited by great food, I've added some of my favorite Tuscan recipes. Laugh More is available for pre-order now and from the 22nd of October at all your favorite bookstores. Online at debbietravis.com, and there's an audiobook read, of course, by me. So curl up with a cuppa or a glass of wine and let's have a good laugh.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.